Hello, everyone. I'm here to talk to you about the line design assignment. So, hopefully, you've read the line ebook and you've learned a bit about line and how you can look at lines and relationships of lines. And a lot of it comes down to the quality of the line, right? Is it short? Is it skinny? Is it fat? Is it straight? Is it curvy? Is it broken? Right? You have all those different ways of looking at how lines can have different characteristics as well as how they can build up relationships between each other, much like shape can. Your assignment for this your assignment for this project will be to explore both geometric and organic lines. So we have some references for you to kind of get a sense of how these work. Geometric are things that are going to be like this. They're going to be straight, almost mechanical looking, right? They're going to have hard edges. They're going to feel like they could be robots or mechanical pieces. Um, and as you scroll through, you'll see that there's thicks, there's thins. They're moving in different directions. These are very energetic compositions. There's a lot going on. And they're defining spaces, right? This one, everything's coming mostly out of a center point, but you start getting these interesting shapes around them because, in effect, they are kind of becoming shapes. They're like long, skinny shapes, right? And you look at the overall composition. This one is definitely feels like it's falling over, has some energy going on. Um, Actually, all of these are very, very energetic, right? Um, it may look at first like they're just a bunch of scribbles and things laid down, but the more you look at them, the more you start seeing there's a little bit of a pattern, there's a little bit of a structure there, and you start getting your eye sort of following around the pieces, right? There's places where it's very complex, places where it's very simple, right? You're creating this interesting abstract sort of essence. So those are the geometric. As a contrast, here are organic lines. And organic lines are more freewheeling and loose and just kind of wild, usually very curvy. They feel very natural. Um, this one, has a lot of color, but again, it's filling the space, but still creating texture. It's creating almost like a rhythm and a flow that you can almost feels like it's dancing, right? This one is a little bit closer to what you might be doing because you're not allowed to use color in this assignment. But you'll see that, yeah, there's all this movement. It's wild. It's kind of crazy, but yet there's this repetition. You see how it's almost like there's these columns of these shapes and they're interacting with each other, almost like a whole bunch of people dancing, but they're all standing up and dancing next to each other. Or maybe it's a time lapse of the same person dancing a bunch of times, right? It's a fun thing with this one. It can be very wild and very loose as a contrast to the more rigid and geometric pieces. And they don't need to be super complex. This is much simpler than the other ones. But again, a lot of movement. And this one has a lot of wildness to the marks themselves, right? These aren't just simple, clean, thin lines that have the same thickness throughout. These have a lot of messy pieces and rough edges. There's spots where it kind of comes in and out. There's places where they just kind of come out and end. There's places where they're barely there, but they're still there. This one also plays with a really nice sense of light and dark, right? Some of these, as you look, there's a lot of light ones that are almost fading back and creating this interesting layered feel. It's almost like you're looking through many, many different layers of the lines. And that can start creating something interesting. This one, again, um, very similar to the first one, right? You're filling the space, but not fully filling the space in, and it's just got this wild energy to it that is a great contrast to the linear, rigid geometric designs. So that's what you're going to be playing with for this assignment. The template has 4 boxes, and you are going to create 4 designs for each. So you'll have 1 page of geometric, and you'll have 1 page of organic. And there aren't really very many new tools this time around, but we're going to add on a little bit. As you're probably getting used to, we're going to do a little window using a layer group. So I'm going to create a group, marquee tool, draw a box. So this is the space that I want to work in. and I'm going to create a layer mask by clicking on that little black box with a circle. And now whatever layers I put inside of this group, I will only see within this space. So I'm going to create a new layer, and I can work. I'm going to stick with black and white, but you can do shades of gray. And we have a brush. So I'm going to do the geometric. And the geometric, we want straight lines mostly, right? You want things that feel very rigid um, and machine-like. So here's a cool trick. With Photoshop, if you click a dot and hold down with your mouse, hold down the Shift key with the other hand, and you can click and drag, and it's going to create either a perfect vertical or horizontal. Right, so that works really well to lock into a perfect vertical or horizontal, and it all just depends on where you start drawing your line. Right, so I can click and drag. Maybe I want a bigger line now, and so I can say let's maybe one here and drag. Right, and I'm starting to create a space. This is starting to create a zone in here. Another great thing you can do with this is instead of clicking and holding, if I click a dot and let go, and I hold down the Shift key, and I click a dot, Photoshop's going to connect the dots. So now I can create almost like a zigzag dot to dot if I want. And since we have that window, we can actually draw things that go off the page, right? So I can start playing with these interesting lights and darks, I'm sorry, thick and thin, straight lines. I can lighten up and maybe have a couple light lines. I'm going to do a line on top, right? Maybe emphasize something over here. Now that starts creating almost like a focal point here because there's something different where things cross. Maybe there's a line that cuts across here. It starts getting bracketed by these guys. I don't know. And I have no idea where I'm going. I'm just kind of doodling. But that's the fun of this. You just sort of start doodling and seeing what kind of cool pieces you can make. Um, it doesn't need to be anything in particular. This is sort of an abstract idea, but you can build up patterns, you can break patterns. You still want to use the entire space as your composition area. So look at how the empty space becomes just as important. You can play with symmetry and asymmetry or radial. All of those concepts you've learned in other assignments all can still apply here. So that works really well for the geometric. For the organic, there's a couple tricks we can do for those. So do this, let's make a new group. That group up here on its own, separate. Layer mask that, so I can now work inside that group. So for this one, I'm going to use back to my brush. So I can draw kind of loose and squiggly if I want to, right? And that works. We have this idea of smoothing. And by default, you're down 0. And as you mark, it's going to be kind of every little wiggle of your hand is going to get captured. If you play with smoothing and take that all the way up, your mouse is going to, or the brush is going to follow along. It's going to feel like it's delayed and moves a little slower, but you'll see that it's very smooth. Photoshop is trying to kind of clean stuff up, so your marks are going to be very simple and very sort of smooth and clean, right? And so you can start playing with that and see what kind of cool stuff you want to do. So I'm making some sort of squiggle. I don't even know what I'm doing, but I'm having fun doing it. All right. Another thing you can do. This is sort of a new thing that I haven't shown you before. If you hit the window, pull down. These are all the different panels that you can open up in Photoshop. And one of them we want is brushes or brush settings. The quick key is F5. And when you open up your brush settings, you're going to get this whole pop-up over here. All along, you've been playing with just a few settings up here, right? You have your thick and thin, your hard and soft, your smoothing, some other stuff there. This adds a whole nother dimension of possibilities for your brush. There are some cool pre-built But even within those, you can go in and add and modify. So the way Photoshop's brush engine works is you have sort of like a footprint, like a stamp, right? And when you color, you get one mark. And when you draw a line, what it's really doing is just taking that stamp and slapping it down a whole bunch of times, right? And it creates the illusion of a line. So, for example, all these ones I drew were a circle that just gets stretched out a whole bunch of times and it becomes a line. So here we can play with what happens with that shape in a lot of interesting ways. So, um, once you have a shape you like, over here on the left, we have a bunch of options, and these will all change based on that. So, for example, if I want to space it out a little bit, I can get a dot to dot. I can also play with things like shape dynamics, so maybe my size, so it gets thick and thin. I'm gonna go back so I don't want space quite so much. But now you can see it starts getting this rough edge. Looks more like a traditional media kind of piece. Um, we can play with the angle depending on our tip. That will change a little bit, or roundness. And you get this nice preview of what it's going to look like. Scattering is pretty cool. As I'm coloring along, it's doing everything sort of in a line. With scatter, what it does is it pulls stuff off of that line. So I still want it to look sort of like a line, but I can sort of stretch it out a little bit, and count will add more. So now that's starting to really look like it's some rough art material that I'm using. And there's a bunch of other ones in here that are worth exploring, but those are the two that are really good for this assignment. Um, Once you have something that you like, then you can come back here and draw. Right? So on the same one with the same smoothing, the same everything, go a little bit smaller. I'm just going to draw, and you can see that it's a very different mark, right? We can talk about the characteristics of the line. So this one is starting to look smooth because it has smoothing on, but the marks themselves are sort of rough. And with this, you can have some fun just sort of seeing what ends up getting drawn. And there's nothing saying you can't play with some of this over here for your geometric, because you could do some straight lines as well, right? In geometric, it just doesn't have the same sort of machine feel. So that's your assignment, is to play with thicks and thins, play with lights and darks, play with the mark itself, as well as creating the illusion of something that's much more rigid and geometric, but still can be very dynamic, or playing with things that are very organic. Um, Yep. So have fun making marks and exploring the brushes in Photoshop, and we look forward to seeing what kind of cool designs you come up with. Again, at the end, you're going to have 4 geometric in one set, and you're going to have another set that have 4 geometric. All right, thank you.